Should you book your next cruise excursion through the cruise line, or should you book something on your own? Well, that's an important question to consider. And my husband and I, we've traveled on over 35 cruises and 7 different cruise lines. We'll say that the answer to that question isn't always the same. In some ports, we've been very comfortable booking something on our own. In others, we felt we definitely are going to book it through the cruise line. So on this cruise channel, I help share some great insight with you from our experience and from the information that we see on some popular cruise communities, so that you can make better decisions to hopefully have an outstanding cruise experience. So the first thing that we like to think about would be, how far is it literally to get back to the ship from whatever excursion we're taking? So for example, in some cases, we found out that we could practically just get off the ship and walk to something that we might want to be doing. For example, it might be a museum, that there might be an excursion, but really it's just within a short walk that you can easily do. Whereas in other cases, it could be something that could be an all-day trip, which obviously runs the risk of more things that potentially could happen, right? Things could be delayed, the bus traffic could be challenging. So those things, that's a fundamental thing. We figure out, how far would it be to get back to the ship so that we don't miss our next cruise port. The next thing we think about would be, how much money are we going to be able to save by maybe doing something on our own? So on one cruise experience, frankly, we found that it was taking us to a couple different stops, and yet we looked at what the excursion was taking us to, and we found out that some of them were actually free those days. So there's a particular fort that was at one of these cruise stops. It sounded really cool and interesting, but we ended up doing that on our own, and we got there and like, well, this whole thing is free. So really most of the cost of the excursion was just toward the transportation, which we were happy to walk on our own. So I try to look at that, but I also look at, if there is a planned excursion from the cruise ship, maybe there's a few other things that are part of that excursion which also sound interesting, that it gets more complicated if you're trying to navigate and get to 3 different things that day. The cost of the excursion could really be worth it. It could also be worth it based on the kind of transportation they're using. So we've sometimes looked at some private tour operators, but we found that they might have very tight, small vans, and people are pretty much packed in them. Whereas on the cruise itinerary, you can get a cruise-sponsored excursion where you're on a nice, big, very comfortable bus, lots of space, lots of great navigation on the way to and from the excursion, and it's been totally worth it. So definitely important to look at even the travel accommodations you're getting to go to those spaces and what's going to make the most sense for you. The other thing we think about it would be sort of the potential gains. So what are the extra benefits that we're getting on that excursion? So one time while we were going, they were going to take us to a really interesting park that we were going to get to see. Well, if we went there on our own, the park tour guides were not going to be available during those times. Whereas through the cruise excursion, there's actually a private tour guide that they were going to help really navigate us through that park, which ended up being a great experience. The other thing that we found, another gain, sometimes on the cruise ships, their cruise-sponsored excursions, they might have their own photographer on the actual excursions with you. And then that person can actually capture those moments, maybe even a little bit better than any pictures you might take on your own. So you definitely want to look at the details of what's involved, and are there things that you would view as gains yourself and worth the extra cost and expense, versus are there things that are maybe added into that excursion that maybe you don't value as much. Another thing that you ultimately need to think about is there anything else that could potentially go wrong while you're taking that excursion? So for example, could there be a lot of traffic backup? So if you're trying to do something on your own to maybe, let's say, a beach that's nearby, is it conceivable that you're only going to be on the beach for a couple of hours, so therefore you can navigate with a taxi to kind of get over there? Or is it something that seems like a very simple ride, but the reality is that the traffic, those different times of day, or the availability of transportation, like getting an Uber or something else to kind of get yourself back, may be really challenging, even if it's not that far. So definitely just thinking about any of the what ifs. And obviously, right, you're on a vacation experience. You want to have a great time. And to some extent, when we felt a little more uncomfortable at certain ports, we thought it's worth the peace of mind knowing that by booking through the cruise line, they're going to get us back. They're going to take responsibility to make that happen. They'll hold up the ship if they need to. Whereas we've heard from other people how when they've done something on their own, it is true the cruise lines will not wait if it's not necessarily a cruise sponsored excursion. So these are things to think about. I'd be curious to hear from you. Feel free to leave your comments on this channel so we can share with others our own experiences and recommendations, particularly at different ports. So I hope the information here is kind of helping you to think about some of these important cruise decisions before you spend your money so that ultimately you're going to have a great cruise experience. And maybe I'll see you cruising with Susan.